Right, dire, a crisis, the worst I've ever seen it. Some of the words being used by businesses and workers' unions to describe the critical worker shortage that's plaguing the country at the moment. Construction, they need about 20,000 extra people. Nurses, we need an extra 4,000 of them. There's a 50-bed backpackers, a hostel in Queenstown that's currently running with 3 staff. They usually run with 10. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern was asked about our labour shortage in Australia last week and argued our current immigration settings strike the right balance.
We have worked very hard to identify the skills gap New Zealanders have, the issues that businesses are facing, and actually to ease the path for those businesses to bring in those skills that we need.
Jacinda Ardern is with us this morning, back in the country. Good morning, Prime Minister.
Morena.
Let's start with the workforce shortage, because it is very much at a critical point now. And we'll begin with nurses. Are you going to do a U-turn on the pathway to residency for nurses?
But there is a pathway to residency, though, Ryan. All we're asking is that you not just be qualified, but that you be willing to work as a nurse, because, of course, we won't solve our problem unless people come in and are willing to be a nurse while they're here. And so we've simplified it. In the past, there was only one nursing category that had a pathway to residency, or a simple one, and that was aged care. We've now opened that up across the board. And relative to other countries, we have a very simple, in some cases, most cases, I would argue, better and easier pathway to residence.
So the GPs and engineers, a whole bunch of others that you've said can go straight to residency. Nurses must wait 2 years. This is interesting.
We just want
because
people to be a nurse for 2 years, and so that's just an issue of making sure. So, Ryan, if I may, I probed at the time when we had the list brought before us why nurses had the 2 years of working as a nurse, but of course it is a guaranteed pathway. The Immigration New Zealand were proposing that they work 2 years first. What I was advised at the time was that that was a request that had come through because there had been a slightly higher rate of those who had come into New Zealand as nurses exiting the workforce. And so that was the reason for that. But of course, Ryan, the one other thing I would say is that New Zealand is not alone at the moment in the fact that there is a global nursing shortage. We have to make sure we're increasing the number of nurses training in New Zealand, and we are. We also have to make sure we have safe staffing levels. We've increased the number of nurses in New Zealand by over 3,000, but we still have vacancies, which is why having that campaign out there in the international market to bring Kiwi nurses home, other nurses in, and to get the 20,000 roughly nurses we have in New Zealand who are currently not nursing, trying to incentivise them to come back into the nursing workforce. And we've also increased nurses' pay. Granted, that was very necessary and needed to be done, but these are all efforts we're making to try and, in this international environment, lift our nursing workforce. OK, so you've said that there is a risk that nurses will skip the profession, go do something else. What evidence do you have of that? It was the issue, as I say, it was the issue raised with us at the time, because naturally you can imagine that I did ask the question. So what evidence did you get? Why nurses on this list, why everyone else is that? And the point that was raised with me was that we had I actually answered it in the first question, a slightly smaller but slightly higher rate of exit amongst those migrant nurses who are coming in relative to others. And the request was, it was relatively small but higher. And the request was ultimately made, Ryan, by those who were seeking the nursing workforce. So those at the time DHBs, some DHBs were making the request to that it would be part of the requirement. But again, Ryan, if the issue is that we have a nursing shortage, why would you not want someone who came into the country to come in not just with a qualification but with a commitment to be a nurse? The problem I've got, Prime Minister, is that Michael Wood, your Immigration Minister, when pushed for the evidence of the claim that you're making, failed to give any evidence and said, quote, "This is based on logic and common sense rather than any particular evidence." Well, as I say, it was based on the feedback we had from Immigration New Zealand, from the sector at the time that the decisions were made. But again, Ryan, what you're arguing is that we not ask people to come in and be nurses, which actually then wouldn't solve our problem. Prime Minister, that's not what I'm saying at all. The vast majority of those people who come in would continue being nurses, and you know that to be true as well. The Nurses' Union was flabbergasted. Oh, look, as I say, it is... As I say, this came directly, though, from those who were seeking to employ nurses, and so who am I to argue with that? But the other point here is that you almost seem to be assuming that a change hasn't been made. It has. Previously, it was only aged care nurses that had the simplicity of that pathway. Yep. We've now opened it up to every nurse. Not every profession has that. This essentially is guaranteed residence, and we don't have an odd point system.
Yeah, no one's arguing that you haven't changed anything. Absolutely not. What I think people are frustrated by is the fact that we are now in a war for talent globally, and we need to have the very best, most attractive settings. And you've now got the nurses' union saying they're flabbergasted you haven't changed the rules here to allow nurses, afford nurses the same pathway that GPs get. Health New Zealand, the big health agency that you have just set up, they say this should be a priority. Surgeons want it, GPs want it, the aged care sector wants it. Why don't you want it too?
Nurse recruitment is a priority, and I have looked at other countries, and I have to say the UK, Australia, the United States, Canada, many of them have quite convoluted systems. Ours is quite straightforward. Come and be a nurse, and you'll have residency in New Zealand
after 2 years.
But of course, that's not the only thing we need to. That's not the only thing that we need to compete on. Well, surely then the only issue then at that point, Ryan, is if people think that barrier is too high, then that suggests that perhaps they don't want to be a nurse in New Zealand, and that is really what we need them for. But look, we of course continue to look at how those recruitment campaigns are going. It's also about the pay that we are paying in the market as well.
Okay.
We've seen a 20% increase since we came into government because we need to make sure that we see those increases because nurses hadn't seen them for a long time. So it's not just about one thing, it's about what we offer as a whole. And we also know we need to keep training those in New Zealand into the workforce too.
Your bottom line is you will not change this rule?
No. We can't be so hard and fast that we don't continue to constantly scan across the horizon. We're out there in the field. That will give us a sense of whether or not, as we say, we would argue that we have a very simple and straightforward proposition relative to other countries who, as I say, sometimes have quite convoluted systems. But we have to keep an eye on whether or not we're able to recruit out there relative to others. So, of course, we keep an eye on that.
Okay. All right, let's go to the other workers now, and in particular the working holiday visa, which a lot of businesses have problems with because we've only managed to get 1,100 working holiday visa holders into the country since March. Obviously, a whole bunch more applications have been granted, which is great, but they're not in country yet. And you've got the likes of Haka Tours who came on this program, tourism operators, hospitality businesses, literally pleading for staff. I mentioned the one in Queenstown, the business that's a 50-bed hostel with 3 staff, should usually be 10 staff to serve that demand. So they've asked for a couple of changes, and businesses kind of lining up behind these now. One of the problems is we are still closed to 16 countries for working holiday visas. Will you open those countries tomorrow?
But we've already issued 14,000 visas for working holiday. A vast bulk of where we often get our working holiday visas are open and are processed and are issued. You'll remember that we opened up working holiday visas earlier than most, actually earlier than we had many of those some other countries open, so that we could make sure we were trying to staff before the remainder, before we actually had tourists coming in. But ultimately, people will still make their plans. And so even though we're issuing those visas, we rolled over a number. We've issued 14,000 new working holiday visas. Of course, we need people to come in now. Some may well be still making their plans, Ryan, but of course their ability to come in is already there. That's not to say there isn't pressure in the system. Interestingly, Australia, exactly the same problem right now. We are not alone in this. It's one of the reasons, though, not just working holiday visas, but generally for the issuing of visas. You'll know that we've had the immigration reset. We have still, however, allowed hospitality and those where there is quite a bit of pressure. They're not having to meet the same wage thresholds as other migrant visas because we know of the pressure they have, and we want to ease that and continue to make it easier for them to bring in staff. And that's one of the things we've done to try and assist with that right now. Okay, Prime Minister, the time is running out very quickly, and there are just a few quick points that businesses have asked of the government. So just coming back to the question, will you open up to these 16 countries? So, Ryan, the only reason I didn't answer that question directly is for the most part, a large number of source countries from where we get ours are already open. I would want to go and check which ones are not. I know there are a few. In some cases, it's reciprocity.
Okay.
I know
so you'll check on that one. That's
but
fine.
I would want to go and check because a large number already are open.
Not a
very
problem.
Much so.
Not a problem. All right. What about the price of administration? For people who want to get a working holiday visa in New Zealand, the price has gone up 70% by the end of this week. Will you reverse that?
And again, we did a comparison. We did a comparison of other countries to check that our working holiday visa costs were not prohibitive relative to other countries.
But don't we want to be the best? Don't we want to be the most attractive?
Ryan,
this is a fight for talent.
The fee of getting a working holiday visa, I can tell you, I have met working holiday applicants overseas. I have talked to people who have used the scheme before. The things that they are focused on are not around the. I've never had anyone raise with me the speed of application or the cost. In fact, we are very fast in issuing.
Yeah.
In the beginning, it was 10 days we were turning them around.
Yeah, no, talking about the cost. And businesses, this is what businesses are telling you.
Well, that's all I'm feeding back is that relative to other countries, we are very competitive here and that this is not something that anyone with a working holiday visa has ever said, I chose not to come to New Zealand because of the application cost. I've not heard that feedback. If businesses have experienced that, they're welcome to share that with us, but we were very careful to compare ourselves to others.
Haka Tours came on the show last week, said it's one of the biggest barriers. Anyway, very quickly, increasing the age from 30 to 35.
I know the folk from Haka Tours, so I'd be happy to reach out to them and hear a little bit more about their experience.
Increasing the age from 30 to 35 for working holiday visas, allowing them multiple visits. Are you open to these changes so that we are as competitive as we can be?
So, New Zealand's settings vary country to country. You'll see that in the UK, we've just increased the working holiday age to 35, but that's often where we have a higher age. It will often be based on the arrangements that those countries offer us. So we try and make sure that we get the best deal for New Zealanders who are looking to do the same thing. So we don't tend to have better circumstances for those coming into New Zealand, but worse circumstances for Kiwis. We always try and get a bit of reciprocity. The UK is a good example. We managed to get a higher age out of them, and so we've offered the same to those who travel into New Zealand too.
Okay. All right. Who's going to win the rugby on Saturday?
I'm always going to back home team.
Prime Minister, thanks very much for your time this morning.